Okay, let's just get this started on the right foot, taking this to the Lord. Father in heaven, we come to you in the name of Jesus. We thank you for the opportunity to gather together here, standing for truth, and for the restoration of Massachusetts, which was the seedbed of our country. And I ask, Lord, you bless this food and our time together. This event would be a positive one for change, that we would all leave tonight enriched, empowered, encouraged to go forward and accomplish the transformation of Massachusetts, to make Massachusetts great once again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Father, we bless the staff that's going to be coming in and out of here, because this is a different type of event where there's cameras and all sorts of things going on, okay? Have a great time.
Are you ready? Go.
Okay, I'm Janet Aldridge, and President of Countville Registry News, and we have a guest speaker tonight, Scott Lively, and Scott is choosing to follow the schedule for speaking at 7 o'clock. So he'll be speaking for an hour, probably go over a few minutes now because he does have a designated hour. Thank you very much, and continue eating, but he will be speaking. Thank you so much.
I can run by itself.
Okay, that is a good volume on the speakers. Well, good evening, everyone. And on behalf of Janet's organization, I'd just like to welcome you to this dinner of the network of citizen journalists that is working here in Massachusetts to raise up citizens who can hold public officials accountable. That's really what it comes down to, and it's very appropriate that tonight that we are focusing the topic on public corruption in Massachusetts. So first of all, I'm a constitutional law attorney and a pastor. So I have two different bases for speaking on the issue of corruption. One of them is from the biblical worldview. This microphone is cutting in and out, but we'll see if it works the way it's supposed to. And then secondly is the basis of a constitutional law attorney with a focus on the Bill of Rights, which is a separate basis for dealing with the problem of corruption and the solution ethics. I'm running for governor here in Massachusetts against Charlie Baker, and yeah, thank you very much. And I think the issue of corruption is central to this election cycle. And so what I'd like to do is first talk about corruption as a problem, and then get into some specific issues involving corruption here in Massachusetts. So I'm going to, we have a number of cameras that are going on here. Actually, I think, first of all, it's very nice to see a room full of people who want to be engaged in journalism. And when we're talking about the issue of corruption, there's really multiple spheres of influence in our society have been corrupted. One of them is journalism. The daily newsletter that I put out called the Daily Trumpeter a couple of days ago, my focus was on ethics as the solution to corruption. And I pointed out that journalism has a standard of ethics that they're supposed to follow. Journalists are supposed to be following a set of ethical principles. There is an organization, a society of professional journalists that publishes this list of ethical principles, and we just never know that journalism today has ethics by the way that they operate. Some journalists are authentic, ethical people. Right? And this is the problem that we face with corruption and the lack of ethics. It's the confusion about right and wrong. You know, we all have the truth sort of written in our hearts, and we all have a conscience built into us. But ethical principles that are written down, that are codified, provide a basis for knowing how to deal with situations on a case-by-case basis. A principle can be applied to a circumstance, and as long as you have a set of guidelines, you can refer to it to know what to do at any given time. Corruption is only recognized in relationship to what's right. It's sort of like the shadow, it's sort of like light and dark. Light and dark work together to provide the contrast that allow us to be able to see, right? And you never would have a shadow if it weren't for the fact that there's a light. So everything is derivative of the fact that there's a light, and everything in dealing with ethics is derivative of the fact that there are standards that you can measure against, and corruption is recognized by the distance that it deviates from the standard. Even the word deviance, right? We are, when you use the word deviance, there's nothing wrong with the word deviance, right? But deviance is a measure of distance from the standard. Like in manufacturing, if you're going to manufacture a water glass, the design is perfected, right? The workman works until the design is perfected, and then the manufacturing process is for the purpose of reproducing that design perfectly every time. Now, in manufacturing, as in all of life, there is imperfection. And so, at the end of the assembly line, when the water glass is coming off the assembly line, there are people that are checking to see if the finished product is close enough to the original design to be useful, right? To be functional. And when everything is working right, the end product can't really even be distinguished from the original. It's perfect. It seems to be perfect. There's always flaws in it someplace. But the degree of deviance from the standard, the more that it increases, the more that the end product is different from the design, the more likely it is to cause problems, right? If you're designing a water glass and the product coming off the end of the assembly line doesn't have a bottom on the glass, right? That's deviance to the point that it's no longer functionally useful. It's worthless. In fact, it's worse than useless. You try to use it and you're getting all the water in your lap. And it's the same way with dealing with morality and with ethics. There is a standard that says there is a clear right and wrong, and that standard is what we measure ourselves by. The further you get away from the standard, the greater the deviance that you have from the standard, the more problems you're going to have with the end product. And that's what corruption really is about. A little bit of corruption can be tolerated, right? When we're talking about when the standard is that we're not going to. I'm trying to think of a good example of how this works. But If the standard is that we're going to have absolute honesty in everything we say and do, right? If that's what the standard is, perfect, absolute honesty. To deviate from that standard, to basically tell your wife when she asks, do I look fat in this dress? Right? To say, no, you don't, even though it might not be true, that's a deviance from the standard that's tolerable. In fact, it may actually be preferable, right, than sticking to the absolute scrupulous letter of the law. But the further you get away in terms of honesty, away from the standard, where you're starting to justify dishonesty, then you've got some problems. Where the standard is true, and you're now bearing false witness, for example, against another person. Right? You know that they didn't do the thing that you're critical of, but you say that they did because there's some advantage you're going to get for it. Or you lie to protect somebody who's guilty of something, even though you know that they did it. That kind of deviance from the standard then produces serious problems. Now, in a society that cares about ethics, those problems can be corrected fairly easily. I'm not going to use this microphone. It's cutting in and out, and it's cutting in and out, and it's too loud. So, but I can speak. I can speak loud enough. Okay, you can't hear me without a microphone? The microphone is cutting in and out. It's very distracting. Okay. Dealing with technical difficulties, right? Talking about deviance from a standard, right? The standard that we want is equipment that works as advertised, right? When things are working well, you don't even notice, right? That things are running smoothly. The microphone is at the volume it's supposed to be. There's no glitches of the sound going in and out. You can proceed forward. Right? But whenever there are problems, right? Whenever the situation deviates from the standard that you're trying to keep, it causes problems. It becomes noticeable, and it has to be dealt with. In Massachusetts, let's just get right down to the problems here. In Massachusetts, we have been dealing with a government that is a marriage of government and organized crime for a very, very long time. The Founding Fathers established a constitutional republic with very clear ethical guidelines. The Bill of Rights is filled with moral principles in which we, the people, are binding our government to limited authority over us. That's what the Bill of Rights is about. The Bill of Rights are not rights that you have, right? The focus is restrictions on the government. The Bill of Rights doesn't create any rights. Right? It restricts the government from limiting your rights. The Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Right? That's the beginning of the First Amendment. What that's basically doing is it's saying Congress is limited, not the people, right? Because we have the right to freedom of religion, so therefore the government cannot choose one denomination over another, because it's our implicit right as citizens not to have a state church imposed on us like existed in Europe for all the centuries before we came over here. And it says, in addition to that, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the Establishment Clause, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The free exercise of religion is something that is inalienable to us. It's not something the government can give to us. It's something we own inherently. That's what the Declaration of Independence defined as unalienable rights. Unalienable rights belong to us because we're created in the image of God, and that He has established those rights for us. They can't be given to us by government. They can't be taken away from us by government. Right? These are clear ethical standards that are imposed on the government, that's supposed to stop the government from interfering with the rights that we hold implicitly. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why in the Second Amendment it says that the necessity of a militia, therefore, and I'm misquoting this, but I'm paraphrasing it because I want to get to the essence of what it says. Right? The fact that we have to have a militia as a society, therefore the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's not granting the citizens a right. It's acknowledging that the citizens already have a right, a natural, unalienable right to self-defense. Government cannot give you the right of self-defense. It cannot take that right away from you. And therefore, attempts to curtail the Second Amendment are illegitimate. Right? The Fourth Amendment protections that we have against illegal search and seizure that have been gutted by the Patriot Act after 9/11, right? What's happened is the corrupt left, right? And let's get just right down to it. What we're dealing with here in terms of corruption. The standard that the Founding Fathers established in the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, and in the speeches that were given by George Washington, his inaugural address, his farewell address at the end of his time serving as president. Those documents lay out the perspective of who we are as Americans, the rights that we have implicitly, and the restrictions on the government. They are ethical standards that restrict the government. What's happened is that the challenge to our constitutional republic has come from people who reject those standards, right? We're talking about Marxists. We're talking about really cultural Marxism here in America. The fourth of the four forms of Marxism, the one that took root here in America. What is the guidance? What is the principle that they follow in their political correctness? The end justifies the means, right? That is the essential concept of the Marxists that are working against our fundamental rights. The end justifies the means. What is the end that they want? The end that they want is a global socialist order that replaces Judeo-Christian civilization, right? So the end of achieving that goal, and the fact that they are not operating according to those same ethical principles themselves, means that they can just simply interfere with the process of our control of our own government. And the more that they've done it, the more effective that they have been in gaining control over the institutions of our society, the more we have deviated from the standards that were established by the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers established local control. They established the idea that government has only the powers that we delegate to it, limited delegated powers. The Marxist system is completely contradictory to that. It puts all the power in the state, and the state, not the parents, have control over children. The state, not the individual, has the decision as to what the tax level is going to be and what regulations you're going to have to follow. Even to the point where unelected officials in bureaucratic agencies are proliferating standards and policies that are binding upon you, even though they were never elected to do that. This is corruption. This is how corruption works. Deviating from the standard that was clear from the beginning. And the solution to corruption is the restoration of ethics. Let's talk about ethics in journalism for a minute, because this is one of my pet peeves. Journalistic ethics used to be central to the practice of journalism. If you were going to be a news reporter, it was understood that your duty was to present information to the public. You were supposed to be the eyes of the public, and that your duty was to present information to the public in the way that the individual citizens would have the ability to decide what to do based on the information that was provided to you. And journalism was so important as an institution. It was called the Fourth Estate, right? That's the designation given to it by Edmund Burke. Remember the same guy who said, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing? And that's Edmund Burke. He's the same guy who named the media the Fourth Estate. That's how important they are to the functioning of our society. And so journalism, and I'm talking to a room full of citizen journalists right now. That's why I want to focus on this idea of ethics and corruption and journalistic integrity, and why you need to have it, and why you cannot follow the example of the corporate media. The corporate media is just supposed to gather that information, to be able to present both sides, to be fair and balanced, right? Has failed in that. How has this happened? I wanted to be a journalist when I was from the time I was very young. I always wanted to be a writer. And as I got into junior high, I really started thinking that that's what would be my career choice. I would become a journalist. That was the beginning of the time when journalism was being sold to young people, not as the way to serve the public, but as the way to change the world, right? Journalism was the tool to change the world. Now, how do you change the world? You control the information, and you give the public only what you want the public to know and believe. You shape their perception of reality by giving propaganda instead of news, of real news. What President Trump calls fake news. It's simply propaganda. Why is it fake news? Because it's propaganda posing as news for the purpose of producing an effect in your mind. How do you know when something is propaganda and not news? Well, a couple of clues, and this is something to guard yourself against as journalists. First of all, does the story contain hidden assumptions? Right? Every story has a perspective. It comes from a particular worldview, right? That if you're writing a story about abortion, for example, and you're a Christian, then the story is going to come from the perspective that abortion is wrong, evil, right? And you're going to tell the story from the perspective of trying to save unborn babies from being slaughtered in the womb, right? Now, when you are a writer who is disclosing your perspective up front, that's legitimate. You can advocate for your perspective as long as you're not pretending to be neutral, right? It's when you pretend to be neutral and you build in hidden false assumptions into the story, that's when you move into the arena of propaganda, because you're trying to shape the thinking of other people without disclosing that you're tricking them. You want them to think that you're neutral and unbiased, but you're really not. And you're slipping in words and phrases in order to be able to change their minds to conform to yours. Another primary way that propaganda replaces news is not allowing both sides to be genuinely represented according to what they actually believe. Now, the worst examples are when they publish a story and they don't give any counter arguments at all, right? And the worst of this kind of propaganda is actually, it's in the news right now. Stories about Russia, for example. Stories about Russia and Putin, right? When you see stories about Russia and Putin in the news, there is never a counter argument to the accusations. Right? The accusations are just simply laid out, and it's just simply assumed that those allegations are true without any counter-argument being included in the story for someone to say, no, that is not true, right? Like the idea, for example, that Putin was behind the murder of that person in London, right? That has always been presented as just simply as if it's true, without the argument, for example, that it would have been completely stupid for Putin to have been behind that murder just before his election in Russia, right? Some of these things are so blatant that the intelligent news consumer will just simply block and say, well, you know, that really doesn't make much sense that they're saying that this happened. But you'll know it's propaganda because no one is offering an alternative perspective about the things they want you to believe. Climate change, right? So-called climate change, which they used to call global warming, right? Until that was no longer useful of a term, then they changed it to climate change. When they present those stories in the corporate media, sometimes you'll get a counter-argument, but usually it's just simply assumed that the climate control people are right, and there's really no argument, right? There's no reason to put an opposing argument in there because we're just simply correct, we're right. That's propaganda. Now, not quite as bad, but still very bad, and still deviating from ethical standards, is including someone's counter-argument but misrepresenting it, right? And I've been through this many times, where you'll be interviewed on a story by a journalist, and you'll say, you'll say many things, just talk with them for an hour, and what they put in the story is something that is not what you actually believe. They'll cherry pick something that you said, and they'll put that in the story instead of what you really believe. Right? An honest journalist allows the person to say what they really want to say in the story. They don't twist it or manipulate it or misrepresent it in order to favor the conclusion that they want to happen. So journalists need to have, citizen journalists need to have a higher standard than that. You have to be able to give both sides the opportunity. And here's the thing, truth will out, right? We believe in right and wrong. We know that honesty is the best policy. We believe in the things that we stand upon, that our principles are superior to the principles of our opponents. And we want fair and balanced coverage so that people can actually see what we say compared to what they say in an honest setting with no spin so that they can come to the conclusion themselves. That's just simply respect for the intelligence of the people that you're presenting your stories to. Also, covering the topics that need to be covered. Right? There's difficult stories, things that are uncomfortable. Right? Citizen journalists have a responsibility to be able to dig into those stories and present the facts, like what Matt Drudge did, right, with the Lewinsky scandal, right, that propelled him into fame. He took on a subject that the corporate media was not willing to take on, that was a difficult subject to bring up because there's some real nastiness in there. But he did it because it was the right thing to do. He was not going to allow that information to be suppressed because the implications for allowing it to be suppressed were just simply huge. And so he came forward, and the result is history. And we were made better as a society because a citizen journalist stepped forward and covered something that the corporate media refused to cover, right? We have people in this room whose have stories to tell about corruption, things that they've suffered, things that they've investigated, and that the corporate media hides and suppresses because they don't want the public to know about these things, right? That's the cover-up. That's the third part of propaganda is stories and presentations to the public that actually steer people in the opposite direction. They're not necessarily telling a lie about something to steer you toward an opinion by affirmative propaganda to try to get you to come to a particular conclusion. They're engaging in this third form of covering up the truth by distraction or confusion or misrepresentation, lying about a particular matter because they don't want the truth to come out. But they feel they have to cover the story. They have to say something, right? Like, for example, the scandal that just took place with A.J. Baker, right? Governor Baker's son. The allegation is that he groped a woman on a JetBlue flight coming up from D.C. or someplace, and that it was such an egregious incident, allegedly, that the stewardess had to intervene and move the young woman to a different seat. And any other person would probably have been arrested as soon as the plane landed on the ground, right? That didn't happen. Instead, the state police came in and they let him go. And by not doing what they would normally have done, it creates the implication that this woman is lying, right? Otherwise, wouldn't the police have done something if it was really true? So here, corruption versus ethics. The ethical standard is to always treat people the same way. No double standard. No favoritism for public officials, right? But what really happens is the public officials and the rich and powerful get favorable treatment. The media is supposed to be the watchdog over that and to come forward with the information when that happens. Here, in the A.J. Baker situation, the state police, there must have been media that knew what was going on with this. This is too big of a story. A whole plane load of people know what's going on. So the incident happens on a Wednesday, and the story gets spiked until Friday night. Now, why would they hold the story till Friday night? Because it's the end of the news cycle, right? It's going into the weekend, and that is the strategy for damage control. And every political operative knows this, right? That you break. If you've got information that's going to be damaging to you, you only release it late on Friday night. In this case, it's the police engaging in the release of information according to a political schedule. And somehow, I believe media was involved in that, knew what was going on, and didn't come forward with the information. I have no proof of that, but I believe it was just simply too big a story for them somebody not to have known something. And but that's how these things work. Now, I want to talk about a few examples of corruption that have been taking place here in Massachusetts. And I want to start with the situation involving Dr. Kishore. And because when we're talking about the standards of ethics, and we're talking about serving the public, the standard for serving the public, the ethical standard, is to always engage in the policy that's going to produce the maximum benefit to the citizens. That you're actually going to do the best that you can for people to be blessed, to prosper, to thrive, not to suffer, right? Any good person, that's what the standard is. And all of us are supposed to be working, especially public officials, are supposed to be working in such a way that they are alleviating suffering, not causing it. That they are solving problems, not perpetuating them to continue their own benefit. But what is going on in reality? Dr. Kishore's story is an example of egregious abuse of power by the Attorney General. Dr. Kishore built an entire network of addiction clinics in which he was treating, at his peak, the majority of people in opioid addiction across the state of Massachusetts with a substantial recovery rate of people getting their lives back. And he did it all without using opioids. A medical doctor using his power of prescription to prescribe pharmaceuticals to treat the symptoms of withdrawal just until the withdrawal was over, no opioids, and then helping them rebuild their lives, reestablish a foundation of security where addiction would not be a part of their future, with a holistic, natural method of family, church, and community. And he had an enormous success. But here's the dirty little secret about corruption in Massachusetts. And this is how the Democrats have managed to get control, a supermajority in both houses of the legislature, right? Even though Massachusetts actually has a conservative majority, which is seen whenever real conservatives come forward, like Ronald Reagan did in 80 and 84, the people come out and vote for the conservative. We are a conservative state, but the Democrats, the corrupt politicians, mostly Democrats, but also the elites of the Republican Party as well, have a system by which they enslave the poor and the disadvantaged, the bottom strata of society, to permanent government dependency, because each one of those people represents a cash cow, an income stream from the federal treasury to coffers controlled by these political leaders and operatives. And every single person that they manage to get on these lists as homeless or mentally ill or drug addicted or one thing after the other, every single one of those things is like a little plastic tube connected to a spigot at the reservoir of federal tax money right here to the state. If you just simply follow the money on these things, folks. Why are there third and fourth generation families in the inner city that have never been broken free from government dependency, right? It's because they don't want them to break free, because that would stop their income stream. When Dr. Kishore came forward with his non-opioid method and was healing addicts from opioid addiction without using opioids, he was robbing them, in their minds, he was robbing them of their money that they were getting from the feds, that they wanted to use for their purposes. And what do they do with that money? They create gigantic armies of permanent socialist voters who are all organized in public employee unions and paid off by exorbitant retirement benefits that put the burden on your children because they aren't funded in the present generation. $48 billion worth of unfunded mandates so far, and it just gets worse all the time. And they're using the poor and the disadvantaged basically as slaves in order to keep that income flowing. And they keep themselves in power because these permanent socialist voters will vote for their patrons and keep them in power. That is the system we have. Conservative solutions will fix the problem. Teaching entrepreneurialism to the people in the inner city so to help them break themselves free of government dependency. That is a task. Hallelujah. Wonderful. That is a task for citizen journalists. Citizen journalists can take that kind of information into the people who really need to know. How do you start a business? What does it mean to be an entrepreneur, right? Where are they going to get that information unless there's an information flow? And who is the best at getting information to the people? Citizen journalists who live among them, who care, actually follow the ethical standards, who really do believe in ethics, who really do want the best for their neighbors, right? That's you. And you have the power through media, through journalism, through writing, right? Through writing articles, right? This is another idea that I talked with Janet about, right? Not just having video cameras, but finding writers who can write from a good conservative perspective. You know, get not this leftist perspective that we're so used to seeing in all the newspapers, but line up writers to write stories from a conservative perspective and offer them for free to all of these newspapers that are on the verge of going out of business because they're losing their advertising revenue, right? And by doing that, serving the people by providing information that can help help them to understand things like entrepreneurialism, and doing it in a way that is going to be received by, you're actually going to be in the stream of providing information. So, anyway, I want to encourage you to talk to Dr. Kishore about what happened in his situation. There's a movie being made about it. I'm telling you, I've seen his case. It's the most egregious example of abuse of power I've ever seen. And I think that there's going, if there is justice available in Massachusetts, some of the people that took down his company are going to end up in court facing charges for what they did. And then another friend here, Mr. Coughlin, who has been working his entire life standing up for the citizen safety regarding the nuclear power plant, and questions about whether there are actually safety protocols in place for people to be properly evacuated in the event of an emergency. And his involvement really as a watchdog, as a whistleblower, right? Which whistleblowers and watchdogs are the cousins of citizen journalists, right? They should be working together, hand in hand. That's why I invited them here, to be here for this speech, in a room with citizen journalists. The people who have the story to tell, connected with the people who have the ability to get that story to the people who can make a difference. That's what it's all about. And that's what, in my part, as a candidate running for governor of Massachusetts, is seeking the ability to get to the bully pulpit, to take the executive branch into the hands of an authentic, full-spectrum conservative, and then to use that bully pulpit to teach ethics again, to be able to speak over the heads of the media, to speak directly to the people, explain what the ethics actually are, point by point, post them on the governor's website, do talks in the community, and make ethics and high standards of morality and effective public service, make that central to the mission of the governor. If we can do that, I'm asking for your help in that. It's the election is September 4th. It doesn't take that many votes to actually win the Republican convention. This is actually the downside of the left having control of the Republican Party for so long. We're talking about corruption in the Mass GOP, right? What is the standard? The standard is represented by the National Republican Platform. You actually read the National Republican Platform. It's a beacon of morality and truthfulness. The Massachusetts Republican Platform is an extremely watered-down version that still has some good points in it, but it's nothing like the real standard. Why is it so watered down? Corruption. The leaders, the rhinos, the Republicans in name only. Why is it that they tell all of us that you have to always vote for the moderate because the conservatives can't win? Why do they always say that? It's not because it's true. It's because they don't want to defend the sanctity of life. They don't want to defend the Second Amendment. They don't want to offend these fundamental principles that they don't really believe in. They instead want to pander to the Democrats and to the left in order to convince them that they are that they're the better candidate because they're Republicans. What's the difference? What's the difference? There is no difference for the most part. Because they've done that ever since right? Ever since the Republican Party has taken that posture of pandering instead of standing on principles, and because of that, the party's down to 10.5% of the voters in Massachusetts, when we used to be 50-50 with the Democrats. That's the bad side. The plus side of this is part of the perfect storm that opens up the possibility for me to actually beat Charlie Baker on September 4th. And what that means is that so few people turn out in a Republican primary because the population's been so discouraged about having nobody but rhinos to vote for. There were only 159,983 votes cast in 2014. Wow. And there'll probably be less this year because Labor Day falls the day before, and a lot of people are just either going to be out of town, or they're going to be too lazy, or they're going to want to extend their vacation or something. Now, what I'm saying is that we have the ability to leverage our votes in a way, right? Because what 80,000 votes would actually take the primary, right? Do you think there's 80,000 pro-lifers out there?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there's 80,000 pro-Trump voters out there?
Oh, yeah.
About 80,000 Second Amendment? Right? We can do this, folks. We can do this. And less than a half, actually less than a quarter, 1% of the registered voters in Massachusetts can actually flip Massachusetts red on September 4th. And if that happens, I promise you, I will stand in the governor's office and I will proclaim ethics once again in Massachusetts. I will not allow corruption to be perpetuated through the policies that come out of the supermajority in the legislature. I have no illusions about cooperating with them because everything I want to do is directly contradictory to what they want to do. So they're going to have to override my veto, and I'm going to veto just about everything that comes across my desk. The less that gets done, the better. And I'm going to do it in such a way that I'm educating the public about what real conservatism looks like in contrast to what they're putting forward in the bills that they managed to override me with, because they're going to be able to do that. But at the same time, I'm going to create a fortress of conservatism in the executive branch. We're going to drain the swamp there first. We're going to bring in strong, full-spectrum conservatives from top to bottom, and we're going to turn that branch of government into an efficient, lean, frugal system that shows how you really get things done. Anybody know how much the governor makes?
Yes.
What's the annual salary?
About 156, I think.
About 156. I'm going to slash that. One of the first things I'm going to do. I'm not going to take the full salary. I'm going to set the example. Whatever percentage I knock off, I'm going to challenge everybody in government to do the same thing. And I'm going to challenge all the departments and agencies to slash their budgets by the amount that I slash my salary. And we're going to put the screws to them. We're going to put the scrutinies to them. And you, as citizen journalists, are going to be able to document this, to get that information to the public, and shake things up. Because we're going to go from 2018, taking the executive branch, and we're going to roll right into 2020. We're going to take the legislature back from the Democrats, and we're going to deliver Massachusetts for President Trump in 2020. You can make that happen by getting out on September 4th. Make sure you vote. Don't listen to the polls. Don't pay any attention to the media. Don't listen to all the nasty propaganda against Scott Lively. Just make the commitment to get in there and vote. You don't have to argue with a single liberal about anything. You don't have to persuade anybody to come over to our side. You just have to find the people that already believe the way we believe and get them out to vote on September 4th. That's it. And we will cream him. There are going to be people going into the ballot box. They're going to vote for me just because I'm not Charlie Baker. They're not going to know anything about me because he's sabotaging himself so completely. It's the perfect storm. And because he's in collusion with Elizabeth Warren and Maura Healey, right? He's in collusion with Elizabeth Warren and Maura Healey in order to be able to get the maximum number of votes for both him and Warren in 2018. Because of that, the Democrats have deliberately put forward the weakest Democrat field in my lifetime, starting out with 3 candidates who had no chance. When one of them started to show some traction, they took him out. So now there's only 2 people there, sure losers.
You're guaranteed because that's the goal of the Democrats, so there's no resistance to Baker getting the maximum possible votes in order to him, so he can run against Donald Trump in 2020 in the Republican primary as the anti-Trump voice, and then fold into the Warren administration when she wins in their dreams. Donald Trump is going to steamroll. Better than Ronald Reagan in 2020. Anyway, that's my presentation for tonight. I don't know whether I've gone under or over time. 10 minutes over? Yeah, I'm good. I've said what I want to say. I want to thank you for your patience and go on again. Stand for the truth. Stand for the truth.